A 10-year-old boy's audacious declaration shattered the silence of a packed courtroom. "You're my mom." What transpired next would prove to be truly heartbreaking. The atmosphere in the packed chamber was thick with tension, so palpable that even the rustle of papers felt jarringly loud. It was a custody hearing, one of countless cases that crossed the bench of Judge Evelyn Harper. At 55, she was a figure of profound poise and unyielding authority, her gavel a stark symbol of finality. Decades spent presiding over cases had cemented her reputation for unwavering fairness and an unflinching adherence to the letter of the law. But this particular case was about to irrevocably alter everything she thought she knew. Seated squarely in the center of the room was Elijah Daniels, a boy of 10, small for his age, his feet swinging nervously, barely grazing the floor. His wide, searching eyes darted across the room, carefully avoiding the intense glares of the two attorneys locked in a fervent debate over his very future. Elijah wasn't merely another file, another statistic. There was an unspoken quality to his quiet presence that tugged at the entire room in a way no one could quite articulate. Judge Harper, her expression calm yet commanding, adjusted her glasses. She cast a brief glance at the boy before redirecting her attention to the battling lawyers. Their arguments blurred into an indistinguishable drone. Stability. Best interests. Permanent placement. She had heard it all countless times before. As she prepared to interject, Elijah suddenly rose from his chair. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Heads snapped sharply in his direction. Even the court reporter's hands paused, hovering above the keys. I just want to say something." Judge Harper leaned forward, surprised, but her composure still intact. "Elijah," she began, her voice steady, "this isn't the time." "You're my mom," Elijah interrupted, his voice trembling but undeniably resolute. The words dropped into the hushed room like a single pin in an echo chamber. The air in the courtroom seemed to freeze, and every eye swiveled to the judge. Yet, this extraordinary moment was only the beginning. For a suspended breath, the courtroom remained utterly silent. A tableau of shock, frozen in time. The attorneys, caught mid-argument, exchanged bewildered glances. The court clerk shifted uncomfortably, and the bailiff, usually unflappable, raised an eyebrow in surprise. Judge Evelyn, Harper's practiced composure, faltered for the briefest second. Her lips parted slightly as if to utter a response. But no words came. She blinked quickly, her stoic mask swiftly reapplied, but the ripple of confusion had already begun its spread. "Elijah," she said carefully, her voice low but steady, "this isn't the place for personal statements. Please, take your seat." The boy, however, stood his ground, his small frame somehow radiating an immovable determination. "I know you're my mom," he repeated louder this time, his words carrying an undeniable conviction. Gasps echoed across the room as whispers erupted among the spectators. A woman in the back leaned toward her neighbor. "What's he talking about? Is she really—" "No way," came the hushed reply. "She's a judge. They vet these people, don't they?" The murmurs grew louder, threatening to engulf the proceedings until the judge banged her gavel twice, her sharp voice cutting through the noise. "Order in the court!" Elijah didn't flinch. He stood there, his fists clenched tightly at his sides, his small face a poignant blend of fear and unwavering determination. Judge Harper stared at him, her professional mask slipping just enough for something deeper, perhaps confusion, perhaps even a flicker of recognition, to flash in her eyes. But she swiftly smothered it, turning with a firm tone to the boy's court-appointed guardian. "Mr. Lawson," she commanded, "control your client." The young man, clearly flustered, hurried to Elijah's side and whispered something urgent. Elijah hesitated, his eyes darting back to the judge, but the resolute determination in his gaze never wavered. Finally, he sat down, though his posture remained stiff, his small shoulders rigid with tension. The attorneys attempted to resume their arguments, their voices now shakier, tinged with an undeniable uncertainty. But the energy in the room had shifted entirely. Every spectator, every official, every participant was now fixated not on the custody battle at hand, but on the quiet, inexplicable storm brewing between the boy and the judge. Evelyn Harper desperately tried to refocus on the proceedings, but her mind was racing, a chaotic whirl of thoughts. She had presided over thousands of cases in her career, yet this singular moment felt profoundly different. Her heart pounded relentlessly in her chest, and for reasons she couldn't explain, she felt the boy's gaze like a palpable weight pressing down on her. There was something about his face, those eyes, so achingly familiar that made it impossible to look away for long. The courtroom continued, a semblance of order maintained, but the judge's usual crystalline clarity was utterly clouded. When the opposing attorneys requested a ruling on an evidentiary matter, she paused longer than usual, her mind caught in an endless loop of questions. Was this some sort of calculated manipulation? A theatrical stunt? Or was there a raw, unsettling truth buried somewhere within the boy's audacious words? From her seat, she stole another glance at Elijah, who now sat quietly, but was still watching her with an unnerving intensity. The sheer power of his gaze sent a shiver down her spine. It wasn't the desperate plea of a child seeking attention. It was something else entirely, something deeper, something that tugged at a corner of her mind she hadn't visited in decades. The hearing pressed on, but the atmosphere remained heavily charged. The boy's words hung over the room like a looming storm cloud, and though Judge Harper tried valiantly to push forward, she couldn't escape the growing, suffocating sense that the past she believed she had long left behind was now rapidly closing in. Judge Harper's hands rested on the polished wood of the bench, outwardly steady, yet trembling fiercely in her mind. She had dealt with unruly defendants, hostile attorneys, and gut-wrenching family disputes throughout her long career, but never had she been thrown off balance like this. Elijah's simple words echoed relentlessly in her mind, unraveling the tightly wound threads of her composure. "You're my mom." It was absurd, wasn't it? Yet the way he had said it, there was no hesitation, no uncertainty. It wasn't the desperate plea of a child grasping for any form of connection. It was a pure, unadulterated declaration. And that was what unsettled her the most. As the attorneys argued back and forth, their voices barely registered. Her focus kept drifting back to Elijah, to the resolute set of his jaw, the defiant lift of his chin. It all felt painfully, achingly familiar. And then there were his eyes, deep brown with flecks of amber that caught the light. She had seen those eyes before, but not in this courtroom, not here, not now. An unbidden, unwelcome memory pushed its way into her thoughts. It was from a time she had meticulously locked away, convinced it was better left untouched. She saw herself at 20, a college sophomore in Durham, North Carolina, juggling night classes and a grueling part-time job at a diner. It was a different world entirely, one where she was still Evelyn Daniels, not yet the dignified, accomplished Judge Harper. Back then she had dreams, vague and undefined, with no clear path to achieve them. And then there was the mistake. She felt a lump form in her throat as the fragmented recollections came rushing back. The boy she loved, but couldn't truly depend on. The harsh whispers of her family's crushing disappointment. The agonizing, grueling weeks spent contemplating the impossible decision she had to make. She had been so young, and the world had seemed so relentlessly unkind. A sharp voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. "Your Honor, your ruling on the objection?" The lead attorney's tone was tinged with impatience, but Judge Harper barely noticed. She blinked, trying to mask her disorientation, and cleared her throat. "The objection is sustained," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Proceed." But even as the case continued, her mind remained hopelessly trapped in the past. Could it be possible? Could Elijah be... No. She had been so careful, so meticulous. The adoption had been closed, sealed tightly to protect everyone involved. She had signed the papers and walked away, swearing never to look back. It was the only way to ensure that the baby she had brought into the world would have a chance at a better life, a life she simply couldn't provide. Still, the boy's small face haunted her. She found herself sneaking glances at him as the attorneys presented their evidence. He seemed so small and vulnerable, yet there was a quiet, unyielding strength about him that reminded her of someone she hadn't thought about in years, herself. It was a strange, almost absurd thought, but it refused to leave her. The hearing continued, but her focus wavered, the boy's earlier words playing on an endless loop in her mind. She didn't know if this was fate, cruel coincidence, or some elaborate, brutal joke. But she couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that she was standing on the edge of something irreversible. The choices she had made so many years ago were colliding with the present in a way she hadn't thought possible. When the attorneys finally paused for a recess, Judge Harper retreated to her chambers, desperate for a moment of solitary clarity. She paced the small, book-lined room, her heels clicking rhythmically on the tiled floor. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass pane of a framed certificate on the wall, her carefully curated life, her flawless reputation. It all felt impossibly fragile now, as if one word from that boy could make it crumble into dust. She thought in das safo oes awes belade blisa. Sitting out there, patiently waiting for her to return. Why would he say something like that? How could he possibly know? She had no answers, only an overwhelming sense that the past was no longer content to stay buried. The courtroom was waiting, the case unresolved. But as Judge Harper stared at the heavy door leading back to the bench, she knew with a chilling certainty that this was no longer just another case. It was personal. Deeply so, and there was no turning back. Elijah Daniels sat quietly in the corner of the courtroom, his small hands gripping the edges of his chair as though the world might tilt and throw him off balance at any moment. The murmurs that had erupted around him had finally died down, but an almost suffocating tension still lingered in the air. His audacious statement had irrevocably altered the atmosphere, and even he, in his youth, could feel its profound weight. Yet he didn't regret saying it. He simply couldn't. Elijah's life had been anything but ordinary, anything but stable. He had been in and out of foster homes since the tender age of 4. shuffled from one temporary family to another like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit anywhere. Some homes were kind, offering fleeting moments of warmth before their inevitable end. Others were cold, stark places where the unspoken rules were clear. Be quiet, stay out of sight, never ask questions. And through it all, through every transition and every new set of strange faces, Elijah had clung to the faint, persistent hope that somewhere, someone was looking for him. That there was a place, a family, where he truly belonged. He first heard the name Evelyn Harper approximately 6 months ago, during the quiet murmur of a whispered conversation he wasn't supposed to overhear. It was in one of his current foster homes, late one night when his foster mother was engaged in a hushed but heated argument with a social worker. "We're still trying to finalize his case," the social worker had said, her voice dropping. "There's a name that keeps coming up. Evelyn Harper." Elijah had carefully tucked the name away in his mind, repeating it to himself like a secret prayer, a hidden mantra. He didn't know who she was, but the way the social worker had uttered the name, it sounded important, significant, maybe even intimately connected to him. Over the next few weeks, driven by an insatiable curiosity, he started asking quiet, unassuming questions, carefully piecing together fragments of conversations and old documents he was never meant to see. He learned that Judge Evelyn Harper had signed some crucial papers a long time ago, papers directly tied to his adoption. That was all he needed to know. Elijah was smart, sharper, and more perceptive than most adults gave him credit for. He didn't understand every intricate detail of the legal system, but he knew enough to realize that this wasn't a mere coincidence. He had spent years wondering why he didn't have a family, why no one seemed to truly want him, and now, at long last, he had a name. He had to know if the judge sitting before him, the formidable woman with the serious face and piercing eyes, was indeed the missing piece of his life's perplexing puzzle. His current foster placement with Mr. and Mrs. Daniels was better than most. They were kind enough, certainly, though always a little distant, as if they were afraid to get too emotionally attached. Elijah genuinely liked Mrs. Daniels's warm laugh and Mr. Daniels's quiet strength, but it wasn't the same. They weren't truly his. And even though they were considering adopting him, a deep-seated part of him hesitated. What if they weren't his real family? What if his true family was still out there, waiting for him to finally find them? When Elijah walked into the courtroom that day, he hadn't planned to say anything. He knew the hearing was solely about his future, whether he'd stay with the Daniels or be placed elsewhere. But the very moment his gaze landed on Judge Harper, something profound inside him shifted. Her face was familiar, so familiar though he couldn't explain how or why. It was like staring at an old photograph you'd forgotten existed. He felt it in his chest, a strange, undeniable pull he couldn't ignore. And then he said it. He hadn't meant to blurt it out. It just came rushing out of him, as if the words had been waiting all his life to be spoken. "You're my mom." The reaction had been immediate. Gasps, whispers, the judge's stunned expression. But Elijah didn't care about the ensuing chaos. He cared about her. He needed her to know, to acknowledge him, to tell him he wasn't crazy for feeling this way. Sitting in the courtroom now, he wondered if he had made a mistake. Judge Harper's expression was utterly unreadable, and he didn't know if she believed him or if she even cared. But deep down, Elijah knew the truth. He wasn't just some kid saying something wild to get attention. He felt it in his bones. She was connected to him in a way no one else could ever be. Elijah glanced at the Daniels, who sat nearby, their expressions a mix of confusion and concerned apprehension. He loved them in his own way, of course, but this was bigger than them. This was about the questions that had haunted him for years. Why was he given up? Who had made that agonizing decision? And why did this woman, the judge with the steady hands and the piercing gaze, seem to hold all the answers? The room was quiet now, the tension thick enough to touch, but Elijah's heart was louder than ever. He knew there was no going back. He had opened the door, and the truth, whatever it might be, was waiting on the other side. The courtroom was silent, save for the soft rustling of papers and the faint, almost imperceptible hum of the overhead lights. Judge Harper sat at her bench, her expression meticulously controlled, but inside, her mind was racing, a whirlwind of disbelief and dawning recognition. Elijah's simple, bold words had pierced through her like a sudden, chilling gust of wind, unsettling the carefully stacked memories she had locked away for decades. She leaned forward slightly, clasping her hands together on the polished wood of the bench. "Mr. Lawson," she addressed the boy's guardian, her voice measured. "I'll need a brief moment with counsel in chambers. Bailiff, recess the court for 15 minutes. The bailiff nodded, and as the attorneys and spectators began to slowly file out, Judge Harper remained seated, her eyes locked on Elijah. He returned her gaze, unblinking. There was no anger or desperation in his expression, just a quiet, unyielding determination that both unnerved and profoundly moved her. Once in her chambers, the attorneys shuffled in, visibly tense, sensing the seismic shift in the proceedings. The judge shut the door behind them, the soft click echoing in the hushed room. She turned to the lead counsel for the foster agency. "Miss Delgado," she began, her voice low and carefully controlled. "I need you to clarify something for me. Is there any record, sealed or otherwise, that connects this child to my past?" Miss Delgado looked genuinely startled, glancing quickly at the other attorney before answering. "Your Honor, well, not to my knowledge, but I can investigate further." "Do that," Harper said, her tone firm, leaving no room for argument. She felt her chest tighten, a knot of dread forming, but she didn't let it show. "I also want immediate access to any and all adoption records involving Elijah Daniels. I understand sealed files require specific authorization, but considering the circumstances—" She paused, her voice faltering for just a brief telling moment. "It's necessary." The attorneys exchanged uneasy, knowing glances, but they nodded. "We'll expedite the request, Your Honor," Miss Delgado assured her, her voice a little strained. Returning to the courtroom, Judge Harper reclaimed her seat, her mask of professional composure firmly back in place. But as the proceedings resumed, the questions swirling relentlessly in her mind grew louder, more insistent. She needed answers, and she needed them fast. Later that evening, she sat alone in her quiet office, the focused glow of her desk lamp illuminating a stack of old case files. She had insisted on obtaining the adoption records herself, unwilling to leave something so deeply personal in the hands of anyone else. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened the folder, her eyes scanning the faded documents. And then she saw it. Her own name. Evelyn Harper, clearly listed as the biological mother of one Elijah Daniels. The air seemed to leave the room as she read the words over and over, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm in her chest. Memories she had buried so profoundly for decades came rushing back in a tidal wave. The endless nights of guilt, the agonizing weight of signing those papers, the desperate hope that he would find a family who could give him everything she, a struggling young woman, couldn't. Her mind reeled, but the undeniable, shocking truth was staring back at her. Elijah wasn't mistaken. He was her son. The next morning, Judge Harper entered the courtroom with a profound resolve she hadn't felt in years. She wasn't sure how this unprecedented situation would ultimately end, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Elijah deserved the truth. As the hearing resumed, she cleared her throat, her voice steady and clear. "Before we proceed," she announced, drawing the immediate attention of everyone in the room, "I need to address something that has come to my attention." She turned to Elijah, her formidable gaze softening, a tender warmth entering her eyes. "Elijah, what you said yesterday, I need to ask you something." Elijah sat up straighter, his eyes wide with a mixture of anticipation and raw hope. "Okay," he whispered, his small voice barely audible. "Why do you think I'm your mother?" she asked, gently, her voice devoid of any judgment. Elijah hesitated for a moment, gathering his courage before answering. I found papers. They had your name on them. And when I saw you here, I felt it." Her chest tightened, a profound ache blooming within her, but she managed a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Elijah," she began, her voice faltering slightly, thick with emotion. "What you're saying, it's true." Gasps rippled through the courtroom, a collective intake of breath as Elijah's eyes instantly filled with tears. "You mean you are my mom?" he choked out, his voice cracking. "Yes," she said, softly, tears now glistening in her own eyes. "I am." For a timeless moment, the entire room seemed to vanish, leaving only the two of them in existence. Elijah's small face crumpled, and hot tears streamed freely down his cheeks. Judge Harper felt her own eyes sting as she fought valiantly to hold back her overwhelming emotions. "I didn't know this would happen," she said, her voice breaking with raw honesty. "But I want you to know, I never stopped thinking about you. Not for one day." Elijah stood, his small frame trembling with emotion, and Judge Harper, ignoring the stunned, bewildered faces around her, slowly rose from her bench. She stepped down, the hallowed space between them diminishing with each deliberate stride, and walked toward him. He hesitated for only a second, a fraction of a breath, before running into her open arms. The courtroom erupted into a cacophony of whispers, a torrent of shocked murmurs. But neither of them noticed. In that profound, shared moment, the years of pain, the unanswered questions, and the deep, persistent longing seemed to melt away into nothingness. It wasn't a perfect ending, not by any stretch of the imagination. There were still complex legal battles ahead, countless questions to answer, and formidable challenges to face. But it was a beginning. The truth was finally out, undeniably, beautifully, and as they embraced, it was clear to everyone. In that room that sometimes the law isn't just about rules and sterile decisions, it's about a deeper justice and the profound courage to confront the past for the sake of a better future. The courtroom had never before witnessed a moment quite like this. Judge Evelyn Harper, a formidable pillar of justice and unwavering composure, embracing the small boy who had unknowingly, irrevocably changed the course of her entire life. This wasn't merely a mother and son reuniting. It was the breaking of years of silence, a deluge of regret, and the final cathartic answering of countless questions. In the days that followed, the intricate legal implications of their newfound bond inevitably became the focal point. Evelyn, with unwavering professionalism, immediately recused herself from Elijah's case, ensuring that another judge, impartial and experienced, would oversee all the subsequent steps. But Evelyn didn't step away from Elijah. Far from it. She met extensively with his social workers, spent precious time with his foster parents, and diligently began the painstaking process of piecing together the long-lost years they had been apart. For Elijah, the lingering uncertainty of what came next didn't overshadow the immense, undeniable joy of finally knowing where he came from. The answers he had sought for so long, the very essence of his identity, were finally his. And with those answers came a profound, newfound sense of belonging. Their journey undoubtedly wouldn't be simple. The road ahead was clearly full of hurdles, both legal and deeply emotional. But for the very first time in their lives, they were walking it together, armed with the undeniable truth and a mutual, unwavering determination to heal. This story isn't just about a surprising courtroom twist that captivated everyone present. It's a powerful testament to the enduring ability of truth to bridge even the widest, most seemingly insurmountable gaps. It's about the transformative power of forgiveness, of others, and perhaps even more crucially, of ourselves. It's about resilience and the incredible human capacity to rise above the painful echoes of the past, to bravely forge a brighter, more hopeful future. Sometimes life takes us down utterly unexpected paths, and the choices we make can resonate and echo for decades. But as Evelyn and Elijah learned with a profound understanding, it's never truly too late to reclaim those echoes and gently, powerfully, turn them into something beautiful and entirely new.